The wagon wheel cracked like a gunshot against the frozen ground, and Adelaide Norton knew in that instant her life had just changed forever. She gripped the reins tighter as her horses whinnied in panic, their breath visible in the frigid air that had descended upon the Utah territory with terrifying swiftness. The blizzard had come from nowhere, transforming the landscape from brown and barren to white and blinding in less than an hour. Adelaide could barely see 5 feet ahead of her now, the wind howling so fiercely it seemed to tear at her very bones through the thick wool coat she wore. She had been traveling with a convoy of 7 wagons heading northeast from Silver Reef toward the mining camps, carrying supplies and medicine that were desperately needed before winter truly set in. It was late November 1883, and already the weather had turned vicious. "Come on, come on," she urged the horses, her voice swallowed by the wind. The crack in the wheel was getting worse with every rotation. She could feel it in the way the wagon lurched to the left, threatening to spill over and dump her supplies across the frozen wasteland. Behind her, she could no longer see the other wagons. The convoy had been strung out in a long line, each driver maintaining enough distance to avoid collisions in the poor visibility. Adelaide had been near the back, and now she realized with growing dread that she had lost sight of them completely. The wind shifted suddenly, and a wall of snow slammed into her face with enough force to make her gasp. Her eyes watered instantly, the tears freezing on her cheeks. She tried to steer the horses to follow what she thought was the trail, but the snow had already covered any tracks the wagons ahead might have left. The landscape was utterly featureless now, just endless white in every direction. Then the wheel gave way completely. The wagon lurched violently to the left, throwing Adelaide against the side rail. She cried out as her shoulder connected with the wood, pain shooting down her arm. The horses screamed and reared, pulling against their harnesses as the wagon tipped precariously. For a heart-stopping moment, Adelaide thought the entire thing would roll, crushing her beneath tons of supplies and splintered wood. But somehow it settled at an angle, the broken wheel digging into the snow while the other 3 bore the weight unevenly. Adelaide sat there for a moment, stunned and aching, listening to the roar of the wind. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it even over the storm. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and currently alone in a blizzard in the middle of the Utah wilderness. Her father had died 2 years ago, her mother just last spring. She had no siblings. The pharmacy in Silver Reef where she worked was all she had, and she had volunteered to make this supply run because the owner, Mr. Henderson, was too old to make the journey, and his son was recovering from a broken leg. "Think, Adelaide," she whispered to herself, her breath clouding in front of her face. "Think." She needed to unhitch the horses before they hurt themselves trying to pull the crippled wagon. She needed to find shelter before the temperature dropped even further. She needed to stay calm. Panic would kill her faster than the cold. Adelaide climbed down from the wagon seat, immediately sinking into snow up to her knees. The wind nearly knocked her over, but she steadied herself against the wagon's side and pushed forward toward the horses. They were still agitated, tossing their heads and stamping their feet. She spoke to them in low, soothing tones as she worked her frozen fingers on the harness buckles. It took far too long, her hands shaking from both cold and fear, but finally she got them free. She managed to tie them to the wagon so they would not bolt and leave her completely stranded. She climbed back into the wagon bed, pulling the canvas cover tighter to block some of the wind. Inside were crates of medicine, bags of flour, bolts of fabric, tools, and her own personal belongings in a small trunk. She dug through until she found her extra blankets and her father's old rifle, which she had brought more out of habit than any real expectation of needing it. She also found the matches and a small amount of firewood she had packed, though she had no idea how she would start a fire in this wind. Adelaide wrapped herself in the blankets and huddled in the corner of the wagon bed, trying to preserve what warmth she had left in her body. The temperature was dropping rapidly as afternoon turned to evening. She knew she could not stay here long. The wagon provided some shelter from the wind, but it was not enough. If she stayed here overnight, she would freeze to death. But where could she go? She had no idea which direction the convoy had gone. She had no idea where she was. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If she left the wagon, she might wander in circles until she collapsed in the snow. At least here she had some supplies, some chance of being found. If anyone realized she was missing, if anyone came looking for her, if the storm ever stopped, Adelaide closed her eyes and prayed harder than she ever had in her life. Miles away, Owen Mitchell pulled his horse to a stop and stared at the horizon with growing concern. He was a tracker by trade and by nature, a cowboy who had spent the better part of his 27 years learning to read the land like other men read books. He had been riding south from his ranch toward Silver Reef to pick up supplies when the blizzard hit. He had considered turning back, but his ranch was actually farther away now than the town, so he pressed on, trusting his horse and his instincts to guide him. But something was nagging at him, a feeling he had learned not to ignore. He had crossed what he thought might be wagon tracks about an hour ago, though the snow had nearly obscured them. They had been heading northeast, which struck him as odd. Most travelers heading to the mining camps took a more easterly route to avoid the rougher terrain. And there had been something else, something that made him pull his horse to a stop and dismount to examine the tracks more closely. One of the wagons had been lagging behind. The tracks were slightly offset, following but not quite aligned with the others. And then, about a quarter-mile farther, those tracks had veered off course. Owen had followed them for a short distance, but the blowing snow made it impossible to see clearly, and he had not wanted to stray too far from his own path to town. Now, huddled against a rocky outcropping that provided minimal shelter from the wind, he found himself thinking about those tracks, about that lone wagon, about whoever might be driving it, now separated from the convoy in the worst blizzard he had seen in years. Owen was a practical man. He knew the smart thing to do was to stay put until the storm passed, then continue on to Silver Reef. He had enough supplies to last a few days if necessary. His horse was strong and well-trained. He would be fine, but he could not stop thinking about that wagon. "Damn it," he muttered, his voice lost in the wind. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Duke, turned his head to look at Owen with what seemed like patient resignation. Duke had been with Owen for 5 years, and the horse knew his rider well enough to recognize the signs of an impending bad decision. Owen pulled his hat down tighter on his head, and his scarf up over his nose and mouth. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat that had seen him through many winters, leather gloves lined with wool, and boots that came up over his knees. He had a bedroll strapped to his saddle, a rifle in its scabbard and saddlebags packed with jerky, hardtack, and a canteen that was probably starting to freeze despite his best efforts. He also had a compass, and he had marked his direction carefully before the visibility became too poor to see landmarks. He was a tracker. If anyone could find a lost wagon in a blizzard, it was him. "This is stupid," he told Duke as he swung back into the saddle. "You know that, right? This is the kind of stupid that gets a man killed." Duke snorted, which Owen chose to interpret as agreement rather than protest. He turned the horse back the way they had come, or as close to it as he could manage in the whiteout conditions. The wind was coming from the northwest, driving the snow almost horizontally across the plain. Owen used that as his guide, keeping the wind at a consistent angle to his left shoulder as he retraced his path. It was slow going, and more than once he wondered if he had lost the trail entirely. But then Duke would pause and sniff at the ground, and Owen would see the faintest depression in the snow that might have been a wagon rut, and they would press on. The temperature continued to drop as the sun set somewhere beyond the impenetrable wall of clouds and snow. Owen's face felt numb despite the scarf, and his fingers ached inside his gloves. He flexed them constantly, knowing that if he lost feeling in his hands completely, he would be in serious trouble. Then, just as he was starting to think he had made a terrible mistake and should turn back while he still could, Duke stopped and whinnied. Owen strained to see through the darkness and the snow, and there, like a ghost materializing from the storm, was the outline of a wagon. Relief flooded through him, quickly followed by apprehension. The wagon was tilted at an odd angle and he could see no movement around it. He rode closer, calling out as he approached. "Hello, anyone there?" No response, just the wind. Owen dismounted and tied Duke to the wagon, then climbed up to peer inside the canvas-covered bed. In the dim light, he could just make out a huddled figure wrapped in blankets. "Hey," he called out, louder this time. "Are you all right?" The figure stirred, and Owen saw a pale face emerge from the blankets. A woman's face, he realized with surprise. Young, with dark hair plastered to her cheeks and eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse and shaking. "Owen Mitchell. I am a tracker from a ranch north of here. I saw your wagon tracks and figured you might be in trouble when the storm hit." Adelaide stared at the man standing at the back of her wagon, hardly daring to believe he was real and not some hallucination brought on by cold and fear. He was tall, she could tell even in the darkness, with broad shoulders and a stance that spoke of someone comfortable in harsh conditions. His face was mostly hidden by his hat and scarf, but she could see his eyes, and they were sharp and assessing but not unkind. "My wheel broke," she said, her teeth chattering. "I lost the convoy. I do not know where they went. How long have you been here? I do not know. A few hours, maybe. It is hard to tell." Owen nodded, his mind already working through their options. They were not good. The storm was getting worse, not better, and night had fallen. The woman was clearly suffering from the cold, and if he was honest with himself, he was not in much better shape. They needed shelter, real shelter, and they needed it soon. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I think so." "But what about my supplies? And my horses? We will come back for them when the storm clears. Right now, we need to get you somewhere warm before you freeze to death." Adelaide knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning her wagon, the medicine and supplies that people were counting on, made her heart sink. Still, she would be no good to anyone dead. "Where are we going?" she asked as she struggled to climb out of the wagon, her legs stiff and uncooperative. Owen caught her as she nearly fell, steadying her with a strong grip on her arm. "There is a line shack about 2 miles northeast of here. It is not much, but it has 4 walls and a roof and a stove. If we can make it there, we will be all right. 2 miles. In this, I know. But it is our best chance. Do you trust me?" Adelaide looked up at him, this stranger who had appeared out of the blizzard like an answer to her prayers. She had no reason to trust him except for the fact that he was here, that he had come looking for her when he could have saved himself. That had to count for something. "Yes," she said. "I trust you." Owen helped her unhitch her horses, though he quickly realized they could not bring both of them. Duke could carry 2 people in an emergency, but leading 2 additional horses through a blizzard at night was asking for disaster. "We have to let them go," he said, hating the decision even as he made it. They will find shelter on their own, probably better than we could provide. Horses are smart that way." Adelaide wanted to protest, but she was too cold and too tired to argue. She watched through a haze of snow as Owen removed the horses' bridles and gave them each a slap on the rump. They took off into the storm, disappearing almost instantly. She prayed they would survive. Then Owen was helping her onto Duke's back, climbing up behind her and wrapping his arms around her to hold the reins. Adelaide leaned back against his chest, grateful for the warmth and solidity of another human being. He kicked Duke into motion, and they headed into the blizzard. The next 2 hours were the longest of Adelaide's life. She lost all sense of direction, all sense of time. There was only the wind, the cold, the rhythmic motion of the horse beneath her, and the solid presence of Owen behind her. He did not speak except to occasionally urge Duke forward or to tell Adelaide to stay awake, to keep moving, to not give up. She had not realized she was drifting off until he shook her gently and said her name, which he must have asked at some point, though she could not remember answering. "Adelaide, stay with me, we are almost there." Were they? It all looked the same to her, just white and dark and cold. But Owen seemed certain and Duke seemed to know where he was going, so she tried to focus on staying conscious and staying in the saddle. Then, like a miracle, there was a shape looming out of the darkness. A small building, barely more than a cabin, but it had walls and a door and a chimney. Owen dismounted and helped Adelaide down, then led Duke to a lean-to attached to the side of the shack. He unsaddled the horse quickly and covered him with a blanket from his bedroll, making sure the animal had some protection from the wind. Then he half-carried Adelaide to the door of the shack and kicked it open. Inside, it was not much warmer than outside, but at least the wind could not reach them. Owen settled Adelaide on a rough wooden bench against one wall, then immediately set about starting a fire in the small pot-bellied stove that sat in the corner. His hands were so cold he could barely strike the matches, but finally he got a flame going, feeding it kindling and then larger pieces of wood from a small stock someone had left in the shack. As the fire began to catch and grow, warmth slowly started to seep into the small space. Owen pulled off his gloves and held his hands close to the stove, wincing as feeling returned to his fingers in sharp, painful prickles. Then he turned his attention to Adelaide. She was sitting exactly where he had left her, her eyes half closed, her face dangerously pale. Owen had seen frostbite and hypothermia before, and he knew the signs. She needed to warm up slowly and carefully, and she needed to stay awake. "Adelaide," he said, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands in his. They were like ice. "Look at me. Can you hear me?" She blinked slowly, her eyes focusing on his face with obvious effort. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so tired." "I know, but you cannot sleep yet. Not until you warm up a bit. Can you move your fingers and toes?" she tried, wincing at the pain. "It hurts." "Good. Pain means you still have feeling. That is good." He rubbed her hands between his, trying to transfer some of his body heat to her. Her fingers were white at the tips, but he did not think the damage was permanent if they warmed her up carefully. Over the next hour, Owen worked to stabilize Adelaide's condition. He wrapped her in both their bedrolls, made her drink water from his canteen, even though she protested that she was not thirsty, and kept the fire going steadily. The shack warmed up slowly, the heat from the stove battling the cold that seeped through the gaps in the walls and around the door. It was not comfortable, but it was survivable. As Adelaide began to revive, she became more aware of her surroundings and her rescuer. The shack was small, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with the stove, the bench she was sitting on, a small table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot in the corner. There were shelves on one wall holding a few supplies, canned goods, coffee, a pot and pan, some candles. It was clearly a way station for ranch hands or travelers, maintained by someone who understood the dangers of the territory. Owen had removed his hat and scarf, and Adelaide could see him clearly for the first time. He had dark hair, longish and wavy, and a strong face with a square jaw and high cheekbones. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, and they held an intelligence and competence that made her feel safer just looking at him. He was handsome, she realized, though his face was weathered and had the kind of deep tan that came from years of outdoor work. He looked like a man who belonged to this land, who understood its moods and its dangers. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life." Owen looked up from where he was checking Duke through a gap in the door. "We are not safe yet. This storm could last for days, but at least we have shelter and heat. That is more than a lot of people have right now." "Why did you come back for me? You put yourself in danger." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the question. "I saw the tracks. I knew someone was in trouble. What kind of man would I be if I just rode away? Most men would have saved themselves. Then most men are fools." He closed the door against the howling wind and came to sit at the table, pulling out a piece of jerky from his saddlebag. "You should eat something. Get your strength back." They shared the jerky and some hardtack, washing it down with water that was so cold it hurt Adelaide's teeth. It was not much of a meal, but it was better than nothing. As they ate, Owen asked her about herself, and Adelaide found herself telling him about her life in Silver Reef, about her work at the pharmacy, about how she had ended up driving a supply wagon in a blizzard. "My father taught me to handle horses," she explained. "He was a freight driver before he got sick. He always said I was better with a team than most men he knew. I did not want to believe him, thought he was just being kind. But after he died, I had to learn to rely on myself. So when Mr. Henderson needed someone to make this run, I volunteered. That was brave of you, or stupid. I am still not sure which." Owen smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less severe. "Brave, definitely brave. Stupid would have been giving up back there in the wagon." As the night wore on, they talked more, their conversation flowing easily despite the strangeness of their situation. Adelaide learned that Owen had inherited his ranch from his uncle 3 years ago, that he ran a small herd of cattle and broke horses for extra income, that he lived alone except for a ranch hand named Pete who helped with the heavy work. He was quiet and self-contained, but there was a warmth to him that emerged gradually as they talked, like the sun breaking through clouds. For his part, Owen found himself drawn to Adelaide in a way he had not expected. She was pretty, certainly, with dark eyes and delicate features, but it was more than that. She had a strength to her, a determination that showed in the set of her jaw and the steadiness of her gaze. She had not fallen apart when disaster struck. She had done what needed to be done, and then she had trusted him enough to follow him into a blizzard. That took courage. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with them both. Owen insisted that Adelaide take the cot while he made himself a bed on the floor near the stove. She protested, but he would not hear of it. "You nearly froze to death tonight," he said firmly. "You need rest. I will be fine here. I have slept in worse places." Too tired to argue, Adelaide curled up on the cot, still wrapped in the bedrolls. She fell asleep almost instantly, lulled by the warmth of the stove and the knowledge that she was safe. Owen lay awake for a while longer, listening to the storm rage outside and the soft sound of Adelaide's breathing. He had not planned on any of this when he set out from his ranch yesterday morning. He certainly had not planned on rescuing a beautiful woman from a blizzard or spending the night in a lined shack with her. Life had a way of surprising you, he supposed. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him. The storm raged for 3 days. On the first morning, Owen woke before Adelaide and checked their supplies. What he found was not encouraging. They had enough wood to keep the fire going for maybe 2 more days if they were careful. They had food for about the same amount of time, though it would be meager rations. Water was not a problem since they could melt snow, but if the storm did not let up soon, they would be in trouble. He did not share these concerns with Adelaide when she woke, her hair tousled and her eyes still heavy with sleep. Instead, he showed her how to make coffee on the small stove, using the supplies from the shelf, and they shared a breakfast of canned beans and hardtack. "How is it out there?" she asked, nodding toward the door. "Still snowing. Wind has not let up. We are not going anywhere today." Adelaide absorbed this with a nod, trying not to show her worry. "My wagon. Do you think it will be all right? It is as safe as it can be. We will go back for it as soon as the storm clears." They spent the day trying to stay warm and occupied. Owen went out periodically to check on Duke and to bring in armfuls of snow to melt for water. Each time he opened the door, the wind tried to tear it from his hands, and snow swirled into the shack like a living thing. The cold was so intense it hurt to breathe. Adelaide, meanwhile, explored the limited contents of the shack and did what she could to make their situation more comfortable. She found a deck of cards on one of the shelves, and they played hand after hand of poker, using buttons from Owen's saddlebag as chips. She won more often than not, which made him shake his head in amused disbelief. "You are cheating," he accused, but he was smiling. "I am not cheating. You are just a terrible poker player. I have won money off ranch hands from here to Colorado with this face." Then they were either drunk or being kind to you. Their laughter filled the small shack, a warm sound that pushed back against the cold and the isolation. As the day wore on, they talked more, learning about each other in the way that people do when forced together by circumstance. Owen told her about growing up on his uncle's ranch, about the hard work and the freedom of life on the open range. Adelaide told him about her childhood in Silver Reef, about watching the town grow with the silver mining boom, about her dreams of one day owning her own pharmacy instead of just working in one. "Why do you not?" Owen asked. "Own one, I mean. It takes money. Money I do not have. My parents left me enough to live on, but not enough to start a business. I would need a loan from the bank, and they do not give loans to unmarried women. That seems like a stupid rule. Most rules are, but that is the way the world works." Owen frowned, thinking, what if you had a partner? Someone to go in with you on the business. Who would want to go into business with me? I have no connections, no family name that means anything. I do not know. Someone who saw your potential, maybe. Someone who believed in you. Adelaide looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them, a recognition of sorts. A possibility. The moment stretched, neither of them quite sure what to say next. Then Duke whinnied from outside, a loud, insistent sound, and Owen jumped up to check on the horse. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a door opening just slightly. That night they shared the cot, purely for practical reasons. The temperature in the shack had dropped despite the fire, and it made sense to share body heat. Owen lay on his back, stiff and careful not to touch Adelaide more than necessary, while she curled on her side facing away from him. But in sleep, barriers dropped. By morning, Adelaide was nestled against his chest, his arm around her waist, their bodies fitted together like pieces of a puzzle. Owen woke first and lay very still, acutely aware of the woman in his arms. She was soft and warm, and she smelled faintly of lavender despite the days without bathing. Her hair tickled his chin. He knew he should move. should put distance between them before she woke and felt awkward, but he could not bring himself to do it. He had been alone for so long, had not held anyone like this since his wife died. The thought brought him up short. His wife, Sarah. She had been dead for 4 years, gone in childbirth along with the baby, a daughter they never got to know. He had loved Sarah deeply, and her death had nearly destroyed him. It was why he had left Colorado, where they had lived, and come to Utah to claim his uncle's ranch. He needed a fresh start, a place without memories lurking around every corner. He had not thought about being with another woman, had not wanted to. The grief had been too raw, the loss too great. But here, now, holding Adelaide in the gray morning light filtering through the gaps in the walls, he felt something stir in his chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first tentative steps toward opening his heart again. Adelaide stirred and made a small sound, then stiffened as she realized where she was. She pulled away slightly, turning to look up at Owen with wide eyes. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to. It is all right. We were cold. It made sense." "Right. Yes, of course." She sat up, pushing her hair back from her face, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment or perhaps the heat from the stove. "How is the storm?" Owen got up and went to the door, grateful for the excuse to move. He peered outside, then turned back with a slight smile. "Letting up, I think. The wind is not as strong and I can see farther than yesterday." Relief flooded Adelaide's face. "Really? That is wonderful news. We should be able to head out tomorrow if it keeps improving. Check on your wagon, see what can be salvaged." The prospect of leaving the shack brought mixed feelings for both of them. On one hand, they would be returning to the safety and comfort of civilization. On the other hand, their time together would end. They would go back to their separate lives, this strange intimacy just a memory. The third day, the storm finally broke. The sky cleared to a brilliant blue, and the sun came out, making the snow-covered landscape sparkle like diamonds. It was breathtakingly beautiful and painfully bright after days of gray gloom. Owen saddled Duke early in the morning, packing up their meager belongings and making sure the fire in the stove was completely out. Adelaide helped him, moving with a quiet efficiency that spoke of someone used to hard work. They did not talk much, both lost in their own thoughts. When everything was ready, Owen helped Adelaide onto Duke, then swung up behind her. They rode in silence for a while, following the tracks that had already started to emerge as the wind stopped covering them. The landscape was transformed, familiar landmarks buried under feet of snow, but Owen navigated with the confidence of someone who knew this land intimately. After about an hour, they reached Adelaide's wagon. It was half buried in snow, but it was still intact, still upright despite the broken wheel. Adelaide let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "It made it," she said softly. They dismounted and dug through the snow to the wagon bed. Everything was there, frozen solid but undamaged. The medicine, the supplies, even Adelaide's personal trunk. Nothing had been stolen by passing animals or people, though realistically, no one else would have been out in that storm. "We need to fix the wheel," Owen said, examining the brake. "I think I can jury-rig something that will hold long enough to get you to the nearest town, but we will need to find your horses first." As if summoned by his words, they heard a whinny in the distance. Adelaide turned, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 2 shapes moving across the snow. Her horses, both of them, heading back toward the wagon as if they had been waiting for the storm to pass. "I cannot believe it," she breathed. "They survived. Told you horses are smart." It took most of the day to make the wagon serviceable again. Owen used tools from Adelaide's supplies and wood from a broken crate to fashion a makeshift splint for the wheel. It was not pretty, and it would not hold up to rough terrain, but it would get them to Silver Reef. As they worked, they talked more, their conversation flowing as easily as it had in the shack. Adelaide found herself telling Owen things she had never told anyone, about her fears and her hopes, about the loneliness of being alone in the world. Owen, in turn, opened up about his past, about Sarah and the baby, about the grief that had driven him to Utah. "I thought if I came here, started over, the pain would go away," he said, his hands busy with rope and wood as he secured the wheel. "But it does not work that way. The pain just comes with you." "Does it get easier?" Adelaide asked softly. "Eventually, not gone, but easier. You learn to carry it instead of it carrying you." He looked up at her, his blue-gray eyes serious. "Meeting you, these past few days, it is the first time I have felt like maybe I could be happy again. Like maybe there is more to life than just surviving." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She had been feeling the same thing, but hearing him say it made it real in a way it had not been before. She moved closer to him, her boots crunching in the snow, and reached out to touch his arm. "I feel that too," she admitted. "I know it is crazy, we barely know each other. But I feel like I understand you better than people I have known my whole life." Owen stood, brushing snow from his knees, and took her hand. His fingers were rough and calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. "It is not crazy. Sometimes the most important things happen fast. You know them when you feel them." They stood there in the snow, hands clasped, the winter sun bright on their faces. Then Owen leaned down and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that tasted of cold air and new beginnings. Adelaide kissed him back, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his coat. When they pulled apart, both were slightly breathless, their eyes wide with wonder and a little bit of fear at the intensity of what they felt. "We should get moving," Owen said, his voice rough. "We still have a long ride ahead of us." "Yes," Adelaide agreed, though she made no move to step away from him. "We should." They stood there a moment longer, then reluctantly separated to finish preparing for the journey. The wagon was as ready as it was going to be. Duke was rested and fed from grain in Adelaide's supplies, and they had daylight left to travel. There was no reason to delay, except that both of them knew that once they reached Silver Reef, everything would change. They would have to face the realities of their separate lives, the expectations of society, the complications of building something real from this extraordinary circumstance. But for now, they had the journey, and that was enough. They traveled slowly, Owen riding Duke alongside the wagon while Adelaide drove her team. The makeshift wheel held up better than expected, though they had to stop periodically to check it and make adjustments. The going was hard through the deep snow, but the horses were fresh and eager after their ordeal, and they made steady progress. As they traveled, they saw signs of the convoy that had left Adelaide behind. Tracks that were now emerging from under the snow, the remains of a campfire, a broken axle abandoned by the trail. Owen examined each sign with the practiced eye of a tracker. "They made it through," he said after studying the tracks. "Probably reached the mining camp before the worst of the storm hit. They are safe." Adelaide nodded, relieved. She had been worried about the other drivers, guilty that her misfortune might have put them in danger if they had stopped to look for her. Knowing they had made it through eased some of that burden. They camped that night in a sheltered valley, building a fire and cooking a proper meal from Adelaide's supplies. They had bacon and beans and fresh coffee, and after days of hardtack and jerky, it tasted like a feast. They talked late into the night, their conversation ranging from the practical to the philosophical, from ranching techniques to the nature of happiness. "What do you want from life?" Owen asked her as they sat by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. "Really want, I mean." Not what you think you should want, but what you actually want. Adelaide thought about it for a long moment. I want to matter, she said finally. I want to do work that helps people, that makes a difference, and I want to not be alone. I have been alone for 2 years now, and it is harder than I thought it would be. I want someone to share things with, someone who sees me for who I really am. I see you, Owen said quietly. I see a woman who is brave and smart and kind. I see someone who does not give up even when things look impossible. I see someone I could easily fall in love with if I let myself. Adelaide looked at him, her heart pounding. Why would you not let yourself? Because it is fast. Because I have been wrong before about what I felt. Because I am scared of losing someone again. He paused, then added, but mostly because I am scared you do not feel the same way. I do, Adelaide said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I feel the same way. It is terrifying and wonderful and completely insane, but I do. I think I started falling for you the moment you appeared at my wagon like some kind of snow angel. Owen laughed, a real laugh that came from deep in his chest. Snow angel. No one has ever called me that before. Well, you were. You saved my life. She moved closer to him, drawn by an invisible force she could not name. And now I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Owen reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. Then do not. Imagine it without me, I mean. Come to the ranch with me. Live with me, marry me if you will have me. I know it is fast and I know people will talk, but I do not care about any of that. I just care about you. Adelaide's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. They sealed the promise with another kiss, this one deeper and more passionate than the first. They held each other close by the firelight, two people who had found something rare and precious in the most unlikely of circumstances. They spent that night together in the most complete sense, their bodies joining as their hearts had already joined. It was tender and passionate and filled with a wonder that comes from discovering another person completely. Adelaide had never been with a man before, and Owen was gentle with her, patient and caring, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the bedrolls, the fire burning low, the stars bright overhead in the clear winter sky. I love you, Owen whispered into her hair. I know it is too soon to say it, but I do. I love you. I love you too, Adelaide replied, her voice full of certainty. I think I have loved you since you found me in that blizzard. They arrived in Silver Reef 3 days later, riding into town in the late afternoon. The town was bustling with activity despite the recent storm. Miners coming off their shifts, women shopping for supplies, children playing in the snow-covered streets. It was familiar and strange all at once to Adelaide, as if she had been gone for years instead of just over a week. The first stop was Henderson's pharmacy, where Mr. Henderson himself came rushing out to greet them, his face a mixture of relief and joy. Adelaide, thank God you are alive. We heard the convoy made it through, but you were not with them. We thought you were lost in the storm. He grabbed her hands, his old eyes misty with emotion. I have been beside myself with worry. I should never have let you go. I am fine, Mr. Henderson. This is Owen Mitchell. He saved my life. She turned to smile at Owen, who had dismounted and was standing beside her. He tracked me through the blizzard and brought me to safety. Mr. Henderson shook Owen's hand vigorously. I am in your debt, sir. Adelaide is like a daughter to me. If something had happened to her because of this supply run. He trailed off, too emotional to continue. They unloaded the medical supplies, which had survived the ordeal in remarkably good condition. Mr. Henderson insisted on paying Adelaide her full wages plus a bonus for the hardship she had endured. He also insisted that Owen accept a reward, though Owen tried to refuse. "You saved her life," the old pharmacist said firmly. "That is worth more than money, but please, let me do this small thing to show my gratitude." News of Adelaide's survival and Owen's heroic rescue spread quickly through the small town. By evening, they were local celebrities, people stopping them on the street to congratulate them and hear the story. Some of the older women in town raised eyebrows when they heard Adelaide had spent several days alone with Owen in a lined shack. But most people were too caught up in the romance of the story to care about propriety. That evening, Owen took Adelaide to dinner at the town's best restaurant, a nice establishment called the Silver Star. Over roast beef and potatoes, they talked about the future. "My ranch is about 20 miles north of here," Owen explained. "It is not huge, but it is profitable. I have about 200 head of cattle and I breed and train horses. Pete, my ranch hand, manages things when I am away. There is a main house, a bunkhouse for Pete, a barn and some outbuildings. It is beautiful land, Adelaide. Rolling hills, good grass, a creek that runs year-round." "It sounds wonderful," Adelaide said, meaning it. "But what about my work? I love being a pharmacist. I do not want to give that up." "You do not have to. Silver Reef is not that far. You could work here a few days a week if you wanted. Or," he paused, taking her hand across the table, "we could think about starting that pharmacy you wanted. Your own place. I have some money saved, and with your knowledge and experience, I think we could make it work." Adelaide stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would do that? Invest in a pharmacy with me?" "I would do anything to make you happy. And besides, it is a good investment. This town is growing. People need medicine and someone who knows what they are doing. That is you." Adelaide squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do. We both deserve to be happy. We have both been through enough pain. It is time for something good." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Silver Reef Church. Mr. Henderson gave Adelaide away, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Pete stood up as Owen's best man, a gruff, middle-aged cowboy who had worked for Owen's uncle before Owen inherited the ranch. Adelaide wore a simple white dress that she and the seamstress in town had hurriedly put together, and she carried a small bouquet of winter greenery since flowers were not available this time of year. The wedding was small but heartfelt. The minister, Reverend Thompson, spoke about the providence of God bringing two people together in the most unlikely circumstances. "When I heard the story of how you met," he said, smiling at the couple, "I knew this was a match ordained by heaven. Out of a storm that could have brought death, God brought life and love. May you always remember that in the storms of life you have each other." After the ceremony, there was a small reception at the Silver Star, attended by Mr. Henderson, Pete, and several of Adelaide's friends from town. They ate cake and drank champagne, and everyone toasted to the health and happiness of the newlyweds. Adelaide had never felt so full of joy, so certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, Owen brought Adelaide home to the ranch for the first time as his wife. The house was a solid, 2-story structure built of stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. Inside, it was furnished simply but comfortably, with a large fireplace in the living room, a kitchen with a good stove, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. "It needs a woman's touch," Owen admitted as he showed Adelaide around. "I have been living like a bachelor for too long, but it is sturdy and warm and the roof does not leak." "It is perfect," Adelaide assured him, and she meant it. The house felt solid and safe, a place where they could build a life together. She could already imagine curtains on the windows, rugs on the floors, perhaps a garden in the spring. That night, They made love in Owen's bed, which was now their bed. It was different from that first time by the fire, less desperate and more knowing, a deepening of the intimacy they had already discovered. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, Adelaide's head on Owen's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" he asked her softly. "More than I have ever been," she replied. "Are you?" "Yes. I did not think I would ever feel this way again after Sarah died, but you have given me something I thought was lost forever. Hope. A future worth looking forward to. We will have a good life together," Adelaide promised. "I know we will." The first months of their marriage were busy and full. Adelaide divided her time between the ranch and working at Henderson's pharmacy 3 days a week. Owen had given her one of the horses from Adelaide's original team, a gentle mare named Daisy, to make the journey to town easier. On the days Adelaide worked, she would ride to Silver Reef in the early morning and return in the late afternoon. Owen worried about her making the trip alone, but Adelaide was determined to maintain her independence and her skills. "I did not stop being capable when I became your wife," she told him gently when he protested. "And besides, you taught me how to read the weather and the land. I will be fine." She was right, of course. Adelaide proved to be as competent at ranching as she was at pharmacy work. She learned to rope cattle, to mend fences, to treat common animal ailments. Pete was initially skeptical of having a woman around the ranch, but Adelaide won him over with her willingness to work hard and her good humor. Within a month, he was treating her like the daughter he had never had, teaching her the finer points of horsemanship and cattle management. Meanwhile, Owen and Adelaide began making plans for their own pharmacy. They scouted locations in Silver Reef, finally settling on a building on Main Street that was currently being used as a general store but whose owner was looking to retire. The location was perfect, with large windows for natural light and enough space for a proper dispensary, as well as a front area for customers. The negotiations took time, but by spring, they had purchased the building and begun renovations. Adelaide threw herself into the project with passion, planning every detail from the layout of the shelves to the color of the sign that would hang outside. Owen watched her excitement with a warm heart, happy to see her dreams coming true. "Mitchell and Norton Pharmacy," Adelaide mused one evening as they reviewed the plans for the sign. "What do you think?" "I think it should be Mitchell Pharmacy," Owen said. "You are a Mitchell now. But Norton is my maiden name, my father's name. I want to honor him. He is the one who taught me to be strong, to not give up." She looked at Owen hopefully. "Is that all right?" Owen pulled her into his arms. "Of course it is all right. Mitchell and Norton Pharmacy it is." The pharmacy opened in June of 1884, and it was an immediate success. Adelaide's knowledge and compassionate care quickly made her the most trusted pharmacist in town. People came from miles around to consult with her about ailments ranging from rheumatism to childhood fevers. She was especially good with children, always having a piece of candy to offer along with the medicine, and mothers blessed her name. Owen often worked in the pharmacy with her, handling the business side of things while Adelaide focused on the medical aspects. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. The townspeople began to refer to them as the perfect couple, and while Adelaide knew no couple was truly perfect, she had to admit they came pretty close. That summer, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually at first, small signs that she tried not to get too excited about, because she had seen too many women disappointed. But when she finally admitted her suspicions to Owen, his face lit up with such pure joy that she started crying. "A baby," he whispered, pulling her close. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could see that he was. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes serious now. But I am also scared, after what happened with Sarah. I know, Adelaide said softly, understanding his fear. But I am healthy and strong, and I am a pharmacist. I know my own body, and I will know if something is wrong. We will be careful. We will get the best doctor. Everything will be all right. Owen nodded, wanting to believe her. They decided to keep the news to themselves for a few more weeks, wanting to be sure before they told anyone. But eventually, the secret became too big to keep, and they shared it with Pete and Mr. Henderson, both of whom were overjoyed. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Adelaide's belly grew round and full. She continued to work at the pharmacy, though Owen tried to convince her to rest more. Adelaide was having none of it. Women have been having babies and working for all of human history, she told him with a laugh. I am not going to sit around being delicate. That would drive me crazy. She did, however, agree to stay at the ranch more as the weather turned cold and her pregnancy advanced. The memories of the blizzard the year before were still vivid for both of them, and neither wanted to risk Adelaide being caught in another storm. The baby was born on a cold February night in 1885, a little over a year after Adelaide and Owen had met. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Owen, waiting downstairs with Pete, thought he would go mad with worry. But Adelaide was strong, and the doctor who had come from Silver Reef was skilled, and in the early hours of the morning, a baby's cry filled the house. Owen rushed upstairs to find Adelaide exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. It is a boy, she said, her voice hoarse but happy. We have a son. Owen sat beside her on the bed, carefully taking the baby into his arms. He was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn blue like his father's. Owen looked down at his son and felt his heart expand in a way he had not thought possible. Hello, little one, he whispered. Welcome to the world. They named him Andrew James Mitchell, Andrew after Adelaide's father and James after Owen's uncle who had left him the ranch. He was a healthy, vigorous baby with a strong set of lungs, and he filled the house with noise and life and joy. The first year of Andrew's life was busy and chaotic in the best possible way. Adelaide balanced motherhood with running the pharmacy, often bringing the baby to work with her and setting up a small crib in the back room where he could sleep while she worked. The customers loved it, cooing over the baby and offering endless advice on everything from teething to sleep schedules. Owen, meanwhile, discovered that fatherhood suited him. He was patient and attentive with Andrew, changing diapers and rocking him to sleep with the same calm competence he brought to everything else. Pete, who had initially been terrified of the small infant, became one of Andrew's favorite people, making funny faces that sent the baby into peals of laughter. As Andrew grew from an infant to a toddler, Adelaide and Owen's life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard, they loved hard, and they built a life that felt rich and full even on the difficult days. The pharmacy continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful businesses in Silver Reef. The ranch, too, was doing well, the herd growing and Owen's reputation as a horse trainer spreading throughout the territory. But it was not the success or the money that mattered most to Adelaide. It was the small moments. Owen coming up behind her while she worked in the garden and wrapping his arms around her waist. Andrew taking his first steps, stumbling between his parents with a look of fierce determination on his little face. Sunday mornings when they would all pile into the wagon and drive to church, then come home for a big family dinner. Sometimes, usually late at night when Andrew was asleep and she and Owen were lying in bed together, Adelaide would think back to that day when her wagon wheel broke in the blizzard. She would remember the fear and the cold and the certainty that she was going to die alone in the snow. And then she would think about Owen appearing like a miracle, tracking her through the storm and refusing to give up on her. "What are you thinking about?" Owen would ask, sensing her mood. "About how lucky I am," she would reply. "About how one broken wheel changed my entire life." "Changed mine too," Owen would say, pulling her closer. "Best thing that ever happened to me, that blizzard." 2 years after Andrew was born, Adelaide gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue-gray eyes, and she was as calm and content as Andrew had been fussy and demanding. The family felt complete with her arrival, the house full of laughter and the sound of small feet running through the rooms. As the years passed, Adelaide and Owen's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course, as all couples do. Adelaide could be stubborn, and Owen could be overprotective. They argued about money, about parenting, about how to run the pharmacy and the ranch. But they always worked through it, always came back to the foundation of respect and love they had built from the very beginning. In 1890, when Andrew was 5 and Emma was 3, they added another wing to the house, creating more space for the growing family, and including a proper office where Adelaide could do her pharmacy work from home when needed. Pete, who was getting older, moved into the main house that winter, taking one of the bedrooms on the first floor. He had become family in all but name, and it felt right to have him close. The pharmacy continued to be the heart of Silver Reef's medical care. Adelaide trained 2 assistants over the years, young women who wanted to learn the trade, and she took pride in passing on her knowledge. She became known throughout the territory as an expert in herbal remedies and pharmaceutical compounds, and doctors from as far away as Salt Lake City consulted with her on difficult cases. Owen, meanwhile, had become one of the most respected ranchers in the region. His cattle were known for their quality, and his trained horses were sought after by cowboys and settlers throughout Utah and beyond. He never forgot his roots as a tracker, though, and he occasionally helped the local sheriff track down missing persons or outlaws. It was dangerous work, but he was good at it, and he felt an obligation to use his skills to help people. In the spring of 1892, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was unexpected, as they had thought they were done having children, but it was welcomed nonetheless. Owen teased her about her being an old mother at 31, and she laughed and swatted him playfully. "31 is not old," she protested. "Women have babies well into their 40s. "I know. I am just teasing. You are as beautiful now as the day I found you in that blizzard. More beautiful, actually, because now I know you inside and out." This third baby, another son they named Thomas Peter Mitchell, was born in November. He was a big, healthy baby who looked remarkably like Owen, and Pete was deeply touched that they had included his name. The old cowboy became Thomas's most devoted guardian, spending hours telling the boy stories about the ranch and the old days. Life was good, sometimes almost impossibly so. Adelaide would occasionally feel a pang of fear, a superstitious worry that such happiness could not last, that something would come to shatter their perfect world. But Owen would remind her to live in the moment, to appreciate what they had rather than worrying about what might be lost. "We are not promised tomorrow," he would say. "All we have is today, so let's make today count." And they did. They made every day count, filling their home with love and laughter, raising their children to be kind and strong and compassionate. They continued to work hard to serve their community, to build something lasting. In 1895, when the children were old enough, Owen took them on their first camping trip in the mountains. They packed up supplies and rode out on horseback, spending 3 days under the stars, fishing in the streams and telling stories around the campfire. Andrew, now 10, was old enough to appreciate the skill his father displayed in tracking game and reading the land. Emma, at 8, was fascinated by the plants they found and asked Adelaide endless questions about which ones could be used for medicine. "She is going to be a pharmacist like her mother," Owen predicted as they rode back toward home, little Thomas asleep in the saddle in front of him. "Maybe," Adelaide said, "or maybe she will want to do something completely different. I just want her to have choices, to be able to decide her own path." "She will. All of them will. We will make sure of it." By the turn of the century, the Mitchell family was firmly established as one of the leading families in Silver Reef. The pharmacy had expanded to include a small medical clinic where a doctor came twice a week to see patients. The ranch had grown to over 500 head of cattle and dozens of horses. Andrew was 15 and showing signs of being an excellent rancher like his father. Emma was 13 and already helping in the pharmacy, her quick mind and gentle manner making her a natural healer. Thomas was 8 and still figuring out where his interests lay, but he had inherited his father's love of the outdoors and his mother's curiosity about how things worked. Adelaide, now 39, looked back on her life with deep satisfaction. From that terrified young woman lost in a blizzard, she had become a respected businesswoman, a beloved mother, a cherished wife. She had helped countless people through illness and injury. She had built something lasting with Owen, something that would endure long after they were gone. And Owen, at 44, felt the same sense of completion. The grief that had driven him to Utah all those years ago was long since healed, though he never forgot Sarah and the daughter he had lost. They were part of his story, part of what had shaped him. But Adelaide and their children were his present and his future, and he treasured them with every fiber of his being. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Adelaide with a trip back to the line shack where they had spent those crucial days during the blizzard. It was June, and the landscape was green and alive, completely different from the white wasteland it had been that winter. But the shack was still there, a little more weathered but still standing. They went inside and Adelaide was flooded with memories. The pot-bellied stove where they had kept warm, the cot where they had shared their first night together, the table where they had played cards and talked for hours, learning each other's hearts. "You remember?" Owen asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Every detail," Adelaide said softly. "I remember being so cold I thought I would never be warm again. I remember you appearing like an answer to prayer. I remember falling in love with you one conversation at a time. Best days of my life in a strange way, despite the danger and the cold. Because that is when I found you." They made love in the line shack that afternoon, just as they had 15 years earlier. It was sweet and familiar and new all at the same time, a reaffirmation of the vows they had made and the life they had built. Afterward, they lay tangled together on their spread-out coats, the sun slanting through the gaps in the walls, and Adelaide thought that life could not possibly get any better than this. As the years continued to pass, the Mitchell children grew into fine young adults. Andrew, tall and strong like his father, took over more and more of the ranch operations. At 20, he married a girl from Silver Reef named Catherine, and they moved into the bunkhouse that Pete had vacated when he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Andrew and Catherine welcomed Owen and Adelaide's first grandchild, a boy named Owen Peter Mitchell, in 1906. Emma, meanwhile, had gone to nursing school in Salt Lake City, determined to expand her knowledge beyond what she could learn in the pharmacy. She returned to Silver Reef at 22 with a nursing degree and a young doctor named Samuel in tow. They married in the spring of 1907, and Samuel joined Adelaide in running the clinic attached to the pharmacy. Emma and Samuel had twin girls the following year, bringing even more life and chaos to the extended Mitchell family. Thomas, the baby of the family, turned out to have his father's gift for tracking and his mother's analytical mind. He became a deputy sheriff at 18, working alongside the local law enforcement to solve crimes and find missing persons. He was good at his job, frighteningly so, and Adelaide worried about him constantly, even as she was proud of his accomplishments. In 1910, Owen and Adelaide celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends from throughout the territory. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. As Adelaide danced with Owen under the stars, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life they had built together. 25 years, she marveled. How did we get so lucky? It was not luck, Owen said, pulling her closer. It was choice. Every day we chose each other. We chose to work through the hard times. We chose to celebrate the good times. We chose love over fear. I would choose you again, Adelaide said softly. In every lifetime, in every storm, I would choose you. And I would track you down every single time, Owen replied, smiling. Through blizzards, through deserts, through whatever the world threw at us, I would always find you. They danced together as their family watched. 3 generations of Mitchells gathered under the Utah stars. The grandchildren played tag around the edges of the party. The adult children laughed and told stories. Friends raised glasses in toasts to the happy couple. It was perfect. It was everything Adelaide had ever dreamed of when she was a young woman working in Henderson's pharmacy, wondering if her life would ever be more than just surviving. In 1915, Silver Reef began to decline as the silver mines played out and people moved away seeking new opportunities. The town that had been so vibrant in the 1880s and 1890s started to empty. Many businesses closed, families packed up and left for bigger cities. But Mitchell and Norton Pharmacy remained open. Adelaide, now 54, refused to abandon the people who still lived in Silver Reef, the elderly and the poor who could not afford to move elsewhere. She and Samuel, her son-in-law, kept the clinic running, often treating patients for little or no money. Owen supported her decision completely, even though it meant the pharmacy was barely breaking even. Some things are more important than money, he told her when she worried about the finances. Helping people, that is what matters. We have enough. We do not need more. The ranch continued to do well despite the town's decline. Andrew ran it with skill and dedication, and Owen was able to step back from the day-to-day operations and spend more time with Adelaide. They took long rides together through the hills, reminiscing about the early days of their marriage. They traveled to Salt Lake City to visit Emma and Samuel and the twins. They doted on their grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about blizzards and wagon trains and how their grandparents fell in love. In 1920, Adelaide finally retired from the pharmacy at the age of 59. Her hands had developed arthritis, making the delicate work of compounding medicines difficult. She turned the business over to Emma and Samuel, confident that it was in good hands. The sign outside was changed to Mitchell and Mitchell Pharmacy, but Adelaide's legacy lived on in every bottle of medicine, every patient treated with compassion and skill. Owen, at 62, had mostly retired from ranching, though he still helped Andrew with the horses he loved so much. He had slowed down physically, his joints stiff from decades of hard work, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He and Adelaide spent their days in comfortable companionship, reading together in the evenings, working in the garden Adelaide had always wanted, playing with their grandchildren when they visited. On a clear November day in 1921, 37 years after they had met in the blizzard, Adelaide and Owen rode out to the line shack one last time. They were older now, grayer, moving more slowly, but they were still together, still in love. They sat on the bench outside the shack, bundled in coats against the late autumn chill, and looked out over the landscape they both knew so well. "Do you have any regrets?" Adelaide asked, taking Owen's hand in hers. "Not a single one," Owen replied honestly. "Every choice I made led me to you and to the life we built. How could I regret any of that? I thought I was going to die that day," Adelaide said softly. "When my wagon broke and the storm hit, I thought that was the end of my story. I was so scared. But it was not the end. It was the beginning. It was the beginning of everything that mattered." She leaned her head against his shoulder, comfortable and content. "I love you, Owen Mitchell. I have loved you for 37 years, and I will love you for however many more we have. I love you too, Adelaide. Always have, always will." They sat there together as the sun moved across the sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. They had raised children, built businesses, served their community, and loved each other through all the joys and sorrows that life had brought. They had survived blizzards, both literal and metaphorical, and they had done it together. As shadows grew long and the air turned colder, they rode back to the ranch, back to the home they had made, back to the family that was their greatest achievement. And if their movements were slower and their hair was white, their hearts were still as full as they had been that first night in the line shack when two strangers became something more. The years that followed were gentle ones. Owen and Adelaide settled into a peaceful old age, surrounded by family and friends. They watched their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and holidays with the large, loving family they had created. Adelaide's health remained good well into her 70s, though she moved more slowly and tired more easily. Owen developed a persistent cough in his late 60s that never quite went away, but he refused to let it slow him down. They took shorter rides together, walked instead of rode when they could, spent long afternoons on the porch watching the world go by. In 1928, Adelaide and Owen celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary with just their immediate family. There were now 8 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, and the house was full of laughter and love. As Adelaide looked around at the faces gathered in her home, all the people who existed because she and Owen had found each other in a blizzard so many years ago, she felt overwhelmed with joy. "We did good," Owen whispered in her ear as they watched the children play. "We did," Adelaide agreed. "We did very good." Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1930, at the age of 71. He had spent the day working with Andrew's son on training a new horse, had eaten a good dinner with Adelaide, had kissed her good night and told her he loved her. And then, sometime in the dark hours before dawn, his heart simply stopped. Adelaide woke to find him gone, and though she had known this day would come eventually, the grief was still overwhelming. She had lost her partner, her best friend, the love of her life. For 69 years she had walked this earth, and for 46 of those years, Owen had been by her side. The world without him seemed impossibly empty, but she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, holding her up when she felt like she might break. They told stories about Owen, remembering his kindness and his strength and his quiet wisdom. They reminded Adelaide that his love lived on in all of them, in every person whose life he had touched. The funeral was held at the Silver Reef Church where they had been married, and it seemed like half of Utah turned out to pay their respects. Owen had been a good man, a fair man, someone who helped people without expecting anything in return. The stories people told about him that day painted a picture of a life well lived, a man who had made the world better just by being in it. Adelaide lived for 3 more years after Owen's death, years that were bittersweet. She missed him every day, felt his absence like a physical ache. But she also found comfort in her family, in the pharmacy that still bore her name, in the ranch that Owen had loved so much. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what an extraordinary man he had been. On a cold November afternoon in 1933, Adelaide asked Andrew to take her out to the line shack one final time. She was 82 years old, frail and tired, but determined. Andrew bundled her into the wagon, worried but understanding. Some pilgrimages had to be made. They arrived at the shack as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Adelaide asked Andrew to help her inside, and she sat on the old bench, now rickety with age, and looked around the small space that had changed her life. "This is where it all began," she told Andrew, who sat beside her. "This is where your father saved my life and where we fell in love. Every good thing in my life came from this place." "Tell me the story again," Andrew asked, even though he had heard it 100 times before. So Adelaide told him, her voice soft but steady. She told him about the blizzard and the broken wagon wheel and the terrible fear of dying alone in the cold. She told him about Owen appearing like a miracle, tracking her through the storm with such determination and skill. She told him about the days they spent in this shack, learning each other's hearts, discovering a love neither of them had been looking for but both desperately needed. "He told me he would always find me," Adelaide said, her eyes distant with memory. "In every lifetime, through every storm. And I believed him. I still believe him." Adelaide Norton Mitchell passed away in her sleep that night, back at the ranch, in the bed she had shared with Owen for so many years. Her family gathered around her in her final hours, holding her hands and telling her they loved her. And as she slipped away, she was smiling, her last words a whisper that only Andrew, leaning close, could hear. "I am coming, Owen. Wait for me." The double funeral was held on a bright winter day, and Adelaide was laid to rest beside Owen in the Silver Reef Cemetery. The marker that was placed over their graves was simple but perfect, inscribed with their names and dates, and a single line that captured the essence of their love story. "Found in a blizzard, loved for a lifetime." The Mitchell family continued to thrive for generations after Adelaide and Owen were gone. The ranch passed down through Andrew's children, and then their children, remaining in the family for over a century. The pharmacy eventually closed as Silver Reef faded into a ghost town, but the building was preserved as a historical site, a testament to the pioneering spirit of the people who had built the American West. But more than the businesses or the property, Adelaide and Owen's true legacy lived on in the family they had created and the love they had shared. Their descendants told and retold the story of how their ancestors had met in a blizzard, how a broken wagon wheel and a determined tracker had come together to create something beautiful and lasting. In the quiet moments of their lives, when faced with their own trials and tribulations, members of the Mitchell family would think of Adelaide and Owen. They would remember that love could be found in the most unlikely circumstances, that courage meant not giving up even when things looked impossible, that the choices we make to help others often end up saving ourselves. The lined shack where it all began eventually fell into disrepair and collapsed under the weight of years and weather. But the spot where it stood remained marked, visited occasionally by Mitchell descendants who wanted to see where their story had truly begun. They would stand in that place and imagine the blizzard, the cold, the fear, and then the hope that had changed everything. And somewhere, in whatever place existed beyond this life, Adelaide and Owen were together still, forever young, forever in love, forever grateful for the broken wagon wheel and the storm that had brought them together. They had found each other in the blizzard, and they had never let go. Not in life, not in death, not ever. It was a love story for the ages, born in the harsh landscape of the American frontier, tempered by hardship and strengthened by choice. It was proof that the greatest adventures often begin with the worst disasters, that hope can bloom even in the coldest winters, and that love, true love, can survive anything the world throws at it. The end.